I was going to start by saying good morning, but I think most probably good afternoon is most probably the way to start. Your chairman, Julian Richard-Watson, bumped into me some time ago and he said, it's really important you make it a very short speech, a funny speech, and please start with a joke. It's actually quite difficult to start that part with a joke, but I did bump into one of my more important owners, Nicholas Jones, on Sunday, who immediately apologized for the fact that he persuaded you to ask me to be here today. And thank you, Nicholas, very much indeed. Syndication, if properly handled, is a wonderful way to become involved in our great sport. Sam Hoskins has obviously gone to great length to tell you what his side is, and he's very good at it. But from a trainer's point of view, it is something that's brought a purpose has brought a huge number of new blood or new people into our sport, and for that it's been a very rewarding experience. Our style might be similar to lots of other people's, but we try and keep our syndicates very small, a maximum of 15 people, so they have that personal feeling. If I just go back and talk about the beginnings and the understandings of the importance of syndicates, I'd like to tell you a little story. I was fishing on the Tweed some years ago, and my gilly, Pud Murray, was rowing me up and down the river all day long. And he suddenly announced towards the latter half of the day, he said, do you mind awfully if we stop early, Mr. Bailey, because I do know that you and I both have one thing in common, and that's our love of racing. I have a runner in the 4:30 at Thirsk. I was actually quite surprised by this comment, but obviously I said yes, and he rowed the boat quite happily to the side of the bank, where we trudged in our in our waders rather, into the betting shop in Kelso, whereupon we were there in time to watch the 4:30 from Thirsk. The room was strangely very crowded for a betting shop in a small town. A lot of Pud's mates were there, all having had a few quid on the horse, and the horses were duly loaded, and there was silence. Then they were off, and everybody crammed towards the big screen. They were there to really encourage themselves to see what was going on. The horse was trained by Mark Johnson. The horse duly won. And so you can imagine the noise and the excitement from my gilly that his horse had won. He was the least bit worried that the horse was actually officially owned by Elite Racing because it was his horse. There were 1,800 people probably in that horse that day, and they all went home happy. But Pud stood there with his friends in a moment of absolute glory, having seen his own horse run and win. So bring me back to syndicates. Syndicates should be open and well managed. There should be no hidden agenda. Sadly, you hear a lot of horror stories nowadays of overcharging and possibly ripping people off. Some syndicates are run for the pleasure of the person who fronts them, and the people who are actually paying their fees are the ones who make all the difficult decisions for everybody else. But thankfully, that's not the case nowadays. I think things have changed dramatically. I've had the pleasure of training for Sam and Hot to Trot and Highclere, and although horses weren't necessarily stars, their clients seemed very happy with their involvement in the national hunt world. We at Kim Bailey Racing try as much as we can to make the whole experience very personal and fun. I employ a person called Peter Kerr, who you'll meet later in the panel, who is a very important part of the whole operation. Peter started his racing life with Peter Harris. Now, as you all know, Peter Harris was the one person who got syndication in a major way. So Peter understood the ethos behind it. Peter Harris and Elite Racing were the ones that most probably brought mass ownership into everybody's life. Our costings are hugely important, as when I buy a horse for a syndicate, we sell it as an all-in-one package for 2 years, with a discount if anybody likes to pay for the whole 2 years in advance, which thankfully they do. All costs are based on the cost of the horse, and all training fees, veterinary fees, transport, entries, and everything else are all thrown in, and so everybody knows what the costs are going to be for that period of 2 years. We have a separate bank account for every single horse, and every syndicate owner receives a set of annual accounts on what's happening during that period of the 2 years. They have the opportunity to choose their partnership name. We let the syndicates choose their colours, the racing names, and if the horse is unnamed, they have the choice of choosing the horse's name as well. This is done by a ballot amongst themselves through Peter, And then at the end of the 2-year period, the account is closed and the horses are usually sold, unless, of course, it turns out to be an absolute superstar, then everybody's very keen to carry on. But it does give a closure when people get involved into a partnership or a syndicate, that they know they're there for 2 years, and they know after 2 years, unless the horse is going to be worthwhile keeping, they're not going to be dragged along for that much longer. Communication is hugely, hugely important. Every syndicate and every horse we has its own racing manager app. Something that's fairly new, but it's very, very good for as far as we're concerned. It's able for us to interact with our owners. So we put down as much information as we possibly can. We video the horses working, we video the horses schooling, and those all get pushed down to the app on a regular basis. And obviously every Sunday I sit there and type out a little bit of information about what's happening. It does mean that Peter and myself and my assistant, Matt, is able to communicate on a regular basis with the owners. And that is something that keeps everybody happy, because there are many more bad days in racing than good days. So if you feel you're well informed of what's going on, it makes the job so much easier. All my syndicate owners have total access to my yard. They can come whenever they want to come and see their horse. Peter will always be there for when they arrive. It's important they should feel it as part of the team. They should feel that they are welcome in the yard. And however much it might be difficult for important owners like Nicholas Jones to see loads of other people there on the day, Peter will look after them where I can look after Nicholas, which is the best way of keeping everybody happy. Seriously though, I believe that small acorns grow into trees. And if you look at and you look after your members, word spreads, and you'll find that many more people will knock on your door to become involved. We have many owners who started with a small share in a syndicate who now have outright horses of their own. We've actually got one person who started in a syndicate 3 years ago with a 10% share. He's now got 8 horses with me. So if you look at the number of syndicates floating around, there are apparently 2,500 people involved in 5,000 horses. I find that hard to believe, but I mean that's the latest figure that's produced. Other ways of syndicates are obviously leasing, and Sam has gone through that quite successfully, or very successfully, sorry Sam. But jump bred fillies are something that we do take on, and I leased one to Sam last year. And we encourage that performance. It is something that's helpful for everybody, especially if a stud doesn't really have the wherewithal to cover the cost of training. It does mean that when we lease these horses out, there's no added cost for the purchase. Therefore, it makes it a cheaper syndicate for people to be involved in. And it also guarantees a home for the horse when it's retired, which a lot of people do worry about nowadays. They like this whole operation of knowing that when their horse is retired, it goes to a good home and has a good life afterwards. So it works both ways for the stud and the syndicate. And it's hugely helped by the MOP scheme for British homebred horses. Moving on, racecourses now really must take a grip and prepare themselves for the syndicate. It is something that's going to become more and more common as the cost of horses go up and the cost of training fees go up. And of course, the lack of incentives through rubbish prize money, frankly, don't justify spending huge amounts of money on horses. So syndication is a really good way of getting involved. Racecourses need to understand this. They need to set up positions for syndicates. The biggest problem we have with large or small syndicates is the race course owners and trainers area. Usually these areas are very small on race courses and become very crowded. And the people who actually own a racehorse outright get quite shirty when they suddenly see 20 people walk into the owners and trainers demanding lunch and a drink, while they have only spent a 20th share of what they do on an annual basis. So we must never lose sight of the individual owner. But racecourses do need to do something about the syndicate. They should start with syndicate rooms. Market Raisin has just opened one, and Ascot, I know, have got one as well. And I think it's important that all these syndicates can be channeled into an area where they mix together. Don't make the individual owner elitist and the syndicate manager the poor man, but try and give them as much pleasure of being involved in that syndicate as they possibly can. Racecourses, I say, need to embrace it and help. In the long term, they will benefit, but in the immediate future, I'm sure they will moan and complain. Tickets to racecourses and races should be regularly available for people who are involved in syndicates. To finish, Racing is a hobby, especially when it comes to national hunt racing. My hobby outside racing is fishing. You gather that because you've already started the conversation this way. I love it. And the fact that you can stand in the river trying to catch a salmon, the thrill and excitement is when you see a flash of silver attach itself to your line. That's your moment of heaven. Sadly, nowadays, salmon are becoming scarcer and scarcer. As a result, a lot of enthusiastic fishermen are going abroad. They're going to Iceland and Russia, who knows? Racing has the same analogy. Every time an owner goes racing, he or she hopes to see their horse win or run well. It's a dream that enhances the sport. We know that dream won't happen very often. But if we don't look after our owners when they go racing, we too will lose our fish and our customers will go elsewhere.